You see that man? The one smiling on the cover of Innovations in Sustainable Urban Planning? The one with the multi-million-dollar architectural firm, the designer suit, and the picture-perfect life? 10 years ago, he thought he was untouchable. He thought he could shatter a life, walk away clean, and simply start anew, leaving the wreckage behind him. He thought wrong. Because what he did to me demanded a response, a sentence, so meticulously crafted and so deeply buried that when it finally detonated, it didn't just hurt him, it vaporized his entire, carefully constructed empire. Welcome back to Pro-Revenge Narratives, the only place where justice is served cold, calculated, and often a decade in the making. Today, we're diving into a story of betrayal so brazen and retribution so patient, it redefines the meaning of professional revenge. This isn't about a nasty email or keyed car. This is about a decade-long game of chess, where the final, flawless move cost the villain everything. Stick around, because by the time this is over, you'll understand why sometimes the sweetest revenge takes the longest to bake. But before we expose the first domino in this colossal collapse, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss the next chapter of calculated retribution. Our protagonist, let's call her Elara, was not a woman prone to drama. She was quiet, meticulous, and intensely focused, the kind of person who built things to last. She met Marcus in architecture school. They were the golden couple, two brilliant minds sketching out futures together, not just for buildings, but for their lives. Marcus was the visionary, the charming face. Elara was the structural integrity, the one who made the ambitious plans actually stand up. For 7 years, they were inseparable. They launched their first firm together, Ethel Partners, named after the Anglo-Saxon word for noble, a perfect reflection of their high-minded ideals. They pooled every cent, every late night, every drop of creative sweat into that company. It wasn't just a business, it was their shared dream, their concrete proof of commitment. The betrayal didn't arrive with a bang, it came as a slow, corrosive drip. Marcus started working later. His phone became a fortress, shielded from Elara's sight. He started using phrases she didn't recognize, referencing projects she hadn't seen. Elara, the structural genius, started feeling the foundation of her own life tremble. Then came the devastating day, a Tuesday she'll never forget, when she intercepted a text. It wasn't just another woman, it was Serafina, a newly hired, young, and fiercely ambitious architect who Marcus had placed in charge of their firm's largest, most prestigious, and secretly sole new project, the high-profile downtown revitalization known as Project Chimera. The text wasn't a clumsy flirtation, it was a cold, contractual agreement. Marcus had been having a long-term affair with Serafina, and worse, he had begun systematically sidelining Elara, feeding Serafina all the credit, all the contact, and all the financial control for Chimera. Chimera wasn't just a big contract, it represented 80% of Ethel Partners' immediate value and 100% of its future pipeline. When Elara confronted him, Marcus didn't apologize. He didn't beg. He simply laid out his terms, delivered with the arrogant calm of a man who thought he held all the power. He offered her a pittance, a ridiculously low buyout for her half of the firm, threatening to drag her through years of expensive litigation that would bleed her dry if she refused. His exact words echoed in the empty apartment, "Take the money, Elara. You're the technician, I'm the talent. Ethel is nothing without me, and I'm done sharing. I've already set up the new structure with Serafina. You'll be replaced by morning." The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Not only had he physically cheated, he had professionally cheated, using their shared life's work as the vehicle to fund his new life and partner. Elara felt a pain that went deeper than heartbreak. It was the violation of her life's purpose, the destruction of her very identity. She saw herself not as a victim, but as a building that had just suffered a catastrophic, malicious structural failure. The initial reaction was a paralyzing helplessness. She could fight, but the cost, emotional and financial, seemed too high. Marcus was right. He had already rigged the game. He controlled the money, the client, and the narrative. But in that moment of absolute despair, something shifted. The broken, trembling woman vanished, replaced by the cool, calculating architect. She didn't see an insurmountable problem. She saw a fundamentally flawed structure that needed to be deconstructed and rebuilt from the ground up. This was the turning point. Elara looked at the paltry settlement offer, and an icy calm settled over her. She knew a protracted, messy legal battle would only serve Marcus's ego and Serafina's ambition, tying up their assets and wasting her precious time. She realized that immediate, visible revenge was temporary and satisfying only for a moment. But pro-revenge? That was a long game. It required patience, stealth, and a perfectly engineered flaw in the villain's own design. She didn't want to wound him. She wanted to build a beautiful, inescapable trap around him. She accepted the settlement. $300,000, a shameful fraction of her worth. Marcus actually smirked, thinking he had won the easiest divorce in history. He had no idea he had just purchased the fuse for his own demolition. Elara took the money, walked away from Ethel Partners, and vanished. No angry calls, no dramatic breakdowns, no social media warfare. She went radio silent. Marcus celebrated his freedom, his new firm, now conveniently renamed Chimera Architects, with Serafina as the shining star, and the massive Project Chimera contract. He never once looked over his shoulder. He never checked for the cracks. Elara, meanwhile, entered the planning phase, the strategy of which was nothing short of brilliant. Her deep knowledge of architectural law, financial structures, and Marcus's ego were her only tools. She knew his biggest weakness, corner cutting. Marcus was a genius on paper and a charismatic salesman, but he was inherently lazy, always looking for the most expensive-looking solution at the cheapest possible price. This was a critical flaw in his foundation, and she was going to exploit it. Step 1. The deep dive. Her first action, using part of her settlement money, was to set up a small, entirely independent consulting firm, Integritas Consulting, focused exclusively on deep-level structural compliance and municipal code auditing. It was a tedious, unglamorous niche, the kind of work Marcus would never touch. Over the next 5 years, Elara didn't just work in this niche, she became the absolute authority in it. She focused on complex, often overlooked municipal zoning, environmental impact assessments, and, crucially, proprietary foundation and material sourcing regulations, specifically the Byzantine regulations of the city where Project Chimera was being built. She built her reputation brick by painstaking brick, becoming a reliable, if obscure, expert witness and auditor for smaller, ethical firms. She learned the city's regulatory spine intimately, identifying every pressure point, every loophole, and every tripwire that a less-than-diligent firm might accidentally stumble over. Or, in Marcus's case, intentionally ignore. Step 2. The financial fortress. She didn't touch her initial settlement money, instead aggressively building her consulting income and investing it in a diversified, anonymous portfolio. She made sure she was financially unassailable. This wasn't about financial destruction, it was about time and independence. She needed to be able to wage a protracted war without concern for her own livelihood. She needed to wait until Marcus's construction was too far along to stop, but not so far along that it was already signed off. The window was narrow, and the timing had to be perfect. Step 3. The trap construction. This was the most patient and crucial step. During her time at Ethel, Elara had been in charge of setting up the firm's standard operating procedures, SOPs, including their mandatory, high-security digital archiving system. Marcus, in his rush to jettison her and her boring processes, had not changed the core structure of that system. He merely delegated access to Serafina. What he didn't realize was that when Elara was setting up the initial system 7 years earlier, she, as a safeguard against data loss, had created an undocumented, encrypted secondary archive on an external, off-site server. An archive that silently, automatically, and anonymously mirrored every single design, financial ledger, communication, and decision made on every project the firm ever handled, including, critically, Project Chimera. The mirror only captured files with the original Ethel watermark, which Marcus stupidly kept using. Every corner cut, every cheap substitute, every forged permit, and every text message between Marcus and Serafina discussing their clever cost-saving measures was being meticulously logged, time-stamped, and catalogued by Elara's silent, digital sentinel. She didn't need to hack him, she simply let him record his own eventual downfall. 5 years melted into 6, then 8, then 9. Elara's life was calm, successful, and independent. Marcus's life, according to the news, was a triumph. Chimera Architects was the darling of the city, and Project Chimera, a massive, visually stunning skyscraper, was now the jewel in the city skyline, nearing completion. Marcus and Serafina were engaged, living in a stunning penthouse, and giving interviews about their uncompromising vision. They had forgotten Elara entirely. They thought they had gotten away with it. They were enjoying the view from the top of the tower she was about to pull down. The 10-year mark arrived. Project Chimera was 98% complete. Millions of dollars were invested, tenants were lined up, the grand opening gala was scheduled for the next month, and Marcus was on the cusp of finalizing the sale, pocketing hundreds of millions. The structural integrity of his entire life was resting on this one final transaction. The time for the execution had arrived. The first act of the execution was subtle, almost invisible. Using her established reputation, Elara anonymously sent a highly specific, complex, and seemingly routine Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) request to the City Planning and Permits Department. The request wasn't a fishing expedition, it was a laser-guided missile. She asked for specific subsections of the Environmental Impact Deviation Report for foundation materials for Project Chimera. Documents so obscure that no one but a true specialist would know they existed, let alone know which precise sections to request. The city, obligated to respond, pulled the official file and sent her the documents signed by Marcus and Serafina. Elara already knew what they said. She was checking for the signature discrepancy that she knew would exist. Then, she pulled up the mirror archive. She compared the officially submitted, clean documents with the internal communication where Marcus had explicitly instructed his supplier to substitute the Grade A, high compressive strength foundation concrete specified in the city-approved plans with a cheaper, faster-setting Grade B mixture to save $12 million and speed up the timeline. The internal emails showed Marcus and Serafina explicitly agreeing to classify the change as an inconsequential material substitution on internal paperwork, knowing full well it violated a specific, but rarely enforced, city ordinance tied to foundation stability on sites near fault lines. The city never checks the internal documents, they check the submitted ones. The second act was the formal complaint. Elara didn't file it herself. She engaged a highly respected, independent architectural law firm, acting as an anonymous whistleblower, using her consulting firm's name, Integritas Consulting. She provided them with a 300-page dossier containing both the official, approved plans and the damning internal mirror archive documents, complete with time-stamped communication logs that showed intent and conspiracy to defraud the city and the investors. The report was an architectural masterpiece of evidence, meticulously annotated with the exact municipal codes and specific stress calculations that proved the cheaper concrete substitution was a critical structural and safety deviation, not a minor clerical error. She didn't claim the building would fall down tomorrow, she claimed it wouldn't withstand a 1-inch to 100-year seismic event as required by law. The shockwave began instantly. The law firm, seeing the unassailable evidence and the serious safety violation, immediately filed an emergency stop work and inspection order with the city and, simultaneously, a $500 million class action lawsuit on behalf of the building's future tenants and investors, citing negligence, fraud, and structural noncompliance. Marcus's slow realization was the most satisfying part of the entire 10-year wait. The city's reaction was swift and brutal. The grand opening was cancelled. Engineers descended on the building. Marcus, arrogant as ever, assured the press and the city council that it was just a clerical mix-up initiated by a disgruntled former employee. He was already spinning the lie. But the engineers weren't looking at paperwork, they were doing core samples. They didn't need to drill deep. The Grade B concrete was visually, chemically, and structurally distinct from the required Grade A. The evidence was literally right under his feet. The city immediately froze all of Chimera Architects' assets and seized the Project Chimera site. The investors, faced with a potential $500 million lawsuit and a building that might have to be demolished or structurally re-engineered from the foundation up, pulled their support. The bank immediately called in the construction loans. Marcus was trapped. He tried to fight back, claiming the documents were fabricated. But that's when Elara's final, elegant stroke landed. She released a tiny, final piece of evidence, not to the courts, but to the Architectural Licensing Board and the IRS, the initial email thread from 10 years ago where Marcus, with the help of Serafina, had explicitly used the $12 million savings from the concrete switch to pay for their new penthouse and their diamond engagement ring, funneling the funds through a series of shell corporations to avoid paying corporate taxes on the misappropriation. This wasn't just a structural defect, it was now tax fraud, corporate malfeasance, and theft of services. The fallout was total. The lawsuit proceeded, and the evidence from the Mirror archive, being continuous, dated, and unedited, was deemed irrefutable. Marcus and Serafina faced not just civil liability but criminal charges for fraud and tax evasion. Chimera Architects was dissolved, its reputation utterly poisoned. The irony was devastating. The firm named after a beautiful, mythical creature turned out to be a monstrous fraud. Marcus lost his firm, his future, his penthouse, and his liberty. The only thing he didn't lose was his debt. Serafina, who had been an accomplice and beneficiary of the fraud, was also professionally ruined, facing her own legal battles and public shame. Their perfect life evaporated like mist. Marcus, the man who wanted to be the biggest name in urban architecture, ended up being the most notorious, a cautionary tale used in every architecture ethics class for the next generation. He had to testify, under oath, about the details of his decade-old settlement with Elara, admitting that he had knowingly bought her out for a fraction of her worth. It was publicly humiliating. Elara, on the other hand, watched the spectacular collapse from a distance. She was never publicly linked to the downfall. Integritas Consulting remained her respected, small, and private firm. She used the peace and financial independence she had built to start teaching. She teaches structural ethics now, emphasizing integrity, compliance, and the importance of a solid foundation, in buildings and in life. She is building things that last, not just structures, but careers rooted in honesty. The small, betrayed architect from 10 years ago is now a respected, quiet authority in her field, financially secure and emotionally whole. She didn't seek to destroy him immediately. She waited until he had built his house of cards as high as it could go, ensuring that the fall would be complete, public, and utterly final. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about the restoration of a fundamental principle. In the world of structural integrity, a flaw is a flaw, and eventually, the weight of the lie always causes the collapse. 10 years. 10 years of patience, calculation, and quiet execution. He cheated, he stole, and he thought he was smarter than everyone. But Elara proved that pro-revenge isn't a flash in the pan, it's a marathon of meticulous planning. It was worth every single day she waited, every late night she spent studying regulations, just to watch his entire legacy dissolve into dust. This, my friends, is why you never betray the architect who understands structural failure better than anyone. What is the most satisfying revenge story you've ever heard? A tale where the villain thought they had won, only to realize their fate was sealed years ago? Let me know in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you appreciate the cold, calculated justice served in this narrative, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Pro Revenge Narratives for more deep dives into calculated retribution. Until next time, remember, always check your foundations.